Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the October Core Advocates webinar. We're really excited to share with all of you tonight some great information on shifting the lift in your literacy classes to your students. We're going to hold off starting the webinar for just a couple of minutes, give everybody a chance to get logged on and settled in. While you're waiting, you might choose to download the two handouts that we'll refer to during tonight's webinar. You should see a Handouts tab on your control panel. And then we're also going to do a little survey of our attendees tonight to get a sense for who's on with us. So if you would just go ahead and click right on the screen and tell us how many Core Advocate webinars you've attended. And we'll get started with the webinar in just a minute.
Great. So it looks like the majority of our participants tonight are first timers or have been to 4 or less webinars. We're happy to have everyone, and we hope that this webinar was the appetite for you to check out our archives and also join us for future webinars.
All right. Thanks, Janelle, and thanks, everybody, for joining us tonight. We're really excited to have you, and we have some great information to share in tonight's webinar. My name is Joni Funderburg, and I am on the Field Impact team at Student Achievement Partners, and I am joined by the rest of my team tonight, Sandra Alberti, Janelle Fan, Linda Nguyen, and Jenny Beltramini. And we are also excited to have two wonderful Core Advocate guests with us tonight, Bev Davis and Lindsay James. And our colleagues Tori Filler and Carrie Swanson will be joining us via video. They weren't able to be on with us tonight. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Core Advocates program, Core Advocates is a national teacher network, and we are all educators who believe in the potential of college and career-ready standards and the importance of all students being prepared for the outcomes that they wish after graduating from high school. As a group, we are eager to support our colleagues in our communities, and we advocate for high-quality instruction, and we understand and embrace the shifts in instruction and assessment that are required by the Common Core and other college and career-ready standards. If you're interested in learning more about the Core Advocate Network, you can contact Jenny or me directly. Our emails are there on the screen for you. We also have a survey on our website that you can complete to join our database, and that will include you on all of our mailing lists and announcements about upcoming webinars. So you can reach us at achievethecore.org. We are active tweeters. We hope that you will follow us at Achieve the Core on Twitter. And we also hope that you will tweet your learning tonight. We know that that's a great professional learning resource. So please share the wealth of knowledge that's coming out in tonight's webinar on Twitter. We ask that you tweet using hashtag Core Advocates, and we would love for you to tag any of us on your tweets as well. We have all of tonight's presenters' Twitter handles there for you for reference, so please indeed tweet. We will be asking you to engage with us a couple of different ways tonight. During the webinar, you can access 2 documents that we'll be using as handouts. Those are on the Handouts tab, and you should be able to just click on them to download them at any time. We'll also be asking you to engage with us with some questions as we progress through, and you can do that using the Questions tab. Just go ahead and type in any question that you have. You're welcome to type in questions at any time, but specifically when we ask you to engage with us, we would love for you to share your responses with that question tab. And then as you noticed as we were waiting to start, we do have some polling as well, and those polls will just pop up on your screen for you to engage with. After tonight's webinar, we'll send out a survey. We're very interested in your feedback and always working to make our webinars better for you. So we appreciate you taking the time to share your feedback with us. And then we will also send you access to the recording of the webinar and all of the handouts and materials that are used tonight. Here at Student Achievement Partners, we're focused in the Core Advocate Network on instructional advocacy. And when we talk about that, we mean that educators are owning, supporting, and promoting resources, tools, and practices that create learning environments where students actually develop college and career readiness. And we collect information about our Core Advocate Network. We would love to hear about the instructional advocacy work that you're doing in your setting. We have a very brief survey, again linked off of our website, Achieve the Core. The direct link right there is hyperlinked in the session materials. So when you receive that recording, you'll be able to just click on that and tell us what you're doing. We love to hear about how this work is making a difference in classrooms. So let's go ahead and get started. On tonight's webinar, we have 3 main goals for you. We hope that you will understand the rationale for limiting teacher talk, why it's important for students to do most of the talking and learning. You'll get some practical, concrete ideas for teaching strategies you can use that actually shift the cognitive lift to students during literacy lessons. And then we'll hear from our 2 guest core advocates about how they've taken this information back and used it in their settings and the impact that that's had on student learning and student engagement. So let's move into the first part and talk about why it's important to limit teacher talk. And for this portion, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Sandra.
Hi, everyone. It is great to be joining you. I just was monitoring the question box and just want to make sure that you all know you'll get the slides. We have all of our webinars archived there, and you'll get a follow-up email that has links to everything that you will be experiencing tonight. So as we often like to do, we always start these conversations about the work with an evidence base, and that's to help us all understand that this is not just somebody's kind of pie-in-the-sky ideas about, hey, here's an idea to try, as we often experience in the world of education, but that there is actually quite a robust research base that supports the rationale behind this idea of limiting teacher talk in the classroom. And so I think that as we have transitioned 7 years in to these new standards, there is always this inclination of, you know, the best help I can give my students is by giving them as much information. And I think as teachers get more nervous about the content, as expectations increase, we find ourselves kind of filling the space of airtime on behalf of the students. And so what we really hope to support everybody in today is this examination about why it's actually important to do the opposite. Like, let's think about how we can strategically limit teacher talk. And so we'll start off by just kind of sharing. I won't read you these slides, but some of the research basis behind the idea of limiting teacher talk. So one of the things that we know in order to support students in reaching these college and career-ready expectations is that students need to read a lot. That is as true of advanced readers as it is of struggling readers, and we have lots of research that supports that. But the kind of underlying notion of both of these excerpts here is students need to be doing the work here. Students need to be doing the reading. Not a whole lot of benefit of them just observing the reading. Of course, taking read aloud as a side conversation, but this idea of doing the work, we really want the students to be engaged in that. The other thing is that students need to read often and read out loud, read to themselves, reread. We need to create time and space for them to be able to do that. Tim Shanahan has the first quote on here and talks about lots of different methods for reading out loud. And one of the things that I always remember reading from Tim Shanahan, and would highly recommend his blog if you aren't already subscribed to that, is, if we just think for a minute, this might be an interesting exercise for you to engage in individually or with your colleagues, across a day, across a week. How much time do we spend talking about reading to our students compared to how much time are students actually reading? It might be an interesting exercise to kind of set some baseline around. Just an interesting activity. And of course, going back, and when I saw this, citation 2000, it's been 17 years since that National Reading Panel came out. There's just this idea of guided oral reading, repeating reading procedures, very important for the fluency and comprehension aspects of the foundational skills for reading. And then finally, this comes right from the standards themselves, the original version of the Common Core State Standards, and from Appendix A, where we speak to a lot of the research that backs up the standards. And it speaks to the idea that when we think about the development of literacy, from a linguistic perspective, there is, what we sometimes consider to be, one of our colleagues, Rochelle Etienne, speaks very eloquently about the inhale of literacy, the taking in, the listening, the reading. And then very important, although sometimes neglected, the exhale piece, the speaking and writing. And I just can so well picture her talking about, can you imagine if we just kept taking in air and never gave the students a chance to exhale? And so very important to this work about, what are the students doing? How do we shift the list? We're not just talking about, put books on the kids' desks and let them read for the whole class period, but really what are the other aspects that we should be thinking about actively, effectively engaging students in. And then building, hopefully you'll recognize, on that research base is the work of the standards themselves. So we've pulled out the anchor standards, 3 of the anchor standards here. First one in reading, and this is Anchor Standard 10, which is where we talk about text complexity, and hopefully, as I say, 7 years in, we all kind of are familiar with that. We know that the expectation is that students both read and comprehend complex text independently and proficiently. I'll just say while I have the microphone, this isn't an on-off switch. Sometimes the work that we do is what we do to get students to independent reading, but it's not to say that we can't offer supports along the way in order to get them to proficiency in that. We have speaking and listening standards where students are actually engaging in conversations and collaborations. And then the writing standard that is very connected to this research base, which is this idea that students are going to draw evidence from those texts and actually use that in order to reflect, analyze, and even conduct research on the information that they are gaining from reading. So a very close connection there. Now, the other thing that I would offer, so, we have that research and then, the shifts that we talk about at Student Achievement Partners a lot. And then a tool that is also very helpful on this, and it's one of your handouts that you have, but certainly is pretty prevalent on Achieve the Core with lots of supporting resources around it. including our new instructional practice toolkit. If you haven't looked at that, a little invitation to do so at some point. And so our instructional practice guide, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is the tool that answers the question of what does this look like in practice. And so it really puts these shifts into self-reflection or observable structure to support teachers in this work. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see the way that the instructional practice guide is organized is that there are three core actions. The first one is this expectation that you should be able to go into a classroom and see or reflect in your own lessons whether or not the lesson is focused on a high quality text as defined by the standards. The second one is that this looks for real when teachers are actually using questions and tasks that accurately address the text and keep people in the text. And then third, and the one that we'll really focus on as the underpinning of today's conversation, is core action 3, when we're actually talking about what are the students doing. And so the teacher move in this is whether or not teachers are providing all students with opportunities to engage in the work of the lesson. And so we'll break that down with a little bit more specificity about what that means. So for each of those three core actions, there are indicators, and as we focus now on core action 3, there are 5 indicators under that core action. And again, this is all about productive engagement of students. And so we won't read all of these to you. You need to, I'll give you some time to do those in the highlight. And I'll just note that this is the one place in the instructional practice guide, and perhaps one of the rare places when we talk about the description of instructional practice, that we're not only here describing teacher actions, but we're also talking about what students do in response to that. And this is, a nod toward the fact that we all know that teachers can be, following a certain step of very prescribed, very, well-intended actions. And if it's not working with that group of kids, it's not the action, right? And so this speaks to both what the teachers do and what the intended student actions should be, and in fact, whether that connection is happening. So I'll stop talking for a second and give you all a chance to peruse that. I think, why don't we go up a second and give people a little bit more time to look at those joint things so that they can see what we're talking about. And, we could just give some quick highlights. Perseverance for the first one, evidence and precision in the answers, in writing and orally, reasoning and problem solving, all things that we may typically see when we think about student engagement. Progress toward reading independently, we talked about that and supports for that. And then, of course, this idea of strengthening language and foundational skills, and that there's evidence for that as well. So now we can go on to our first poll question, which we flashed up there a moment ago.
Great. And so the question is, which indicators of core action 3 do you find most challenging in your classroom and why? Please use the screen to set your answer.
And these are the shorthand versions? Yeah. These are the shorthand versions of those indicators under core action 3. If you've already downloaded handout 1, the IPG, you can see that previous slide there for your reference as well.
Actually, I think we have the wrong poll up right now. This is the poll that goes with the video we're going to show next. So maybe folks could just use the questions tab to answer which of those core actions they find most challenging.
And since people are using the question chat, why don't we flip back to that previous slide, Joni, so people are asking to see those indicators. Yeah, great. Right, we have quite a few people on tonight's webinar, actually, 442 people, and so there's lots and lots and lots of responses to these questions, and so that is great, and everything from, yeah, really hard to make sure we have good quality text for some of you. Others, it's this idea of students being willing to do the struggle, and lots. I should just note that you can't see everybody's responses in the question box, but as the webinar goes on, my colleagues and I will kind of go into that question box and try to share out as many of the answers as possible, but focus your attention on the presentation will be the best bet, and again, you will get a follow-up email that has all of this information in it. And so I really just appreciate the realness of all of this, and excited about the fact that we have two real life people who really do this stuff who are going to be able to share their experiences with this. And it comes from a project that we did at Student Achievement Partners, inspired by another one of my favorite literacy blogs that I subscribe to, which is the Birkins and Yaris blogs. Very well written, not researchy. It's just two people who care a lot about literacy instruction, and they talk about lots of different aspects of that work. And so they published a book called Who's Doing the Work? We had a focus group that was working on systems that have been built around balanced literacy and how we make sure that in that structure we are addressing the expectations of the standards. And so from that, we developed a project with teachers and practitioners, and tried to learn about how this work lives in real life. So what we're going to do now, and I know most of you, all of you are teachers, and so you can imagine the hesitation in my breath right now. We're about to show a video, and you know how that goes. So hopefully everything will work and the sound will come through, and we'll just acknowledge that it's not as great as when you're seeing it live. But again, you'll have access to all of these recordings after this. So lean in, and hopefully the sound will come through effectively. Thanks. And I should say this video is from a teacher before the project.
Now listen to these words. Sometimes snow is light, dry, and fluffy. Walking through light snow is fun. You can kick it into the air. You can scoop up a big shovelful of light, dry snow. Describe the snow to me now. The author changed the words and described the snow a different way. Peyton? You can scoop some fluffy snow into a big one. Okay, I heard you say a word in there that answers the question. I asked, how does the author describe the snow? Is snow described as you can pick it up in a shovel, or is that something you can do with the snow? That's something you can do. I heard you use the word fluffy. Was that a word that the author used? It is. How else did the author describe that snow? You can walk in it. Okay, those are things you can do, but tell me about the snow. Think about the snow when it falls and it's on the ground. What does the author tell us about it? Ader? When you walk in it, you have footprints. Okay, again, you're telling me things that you do. But I want to know about the snow. Does the snow walk and leave footprints? No. That's something that people do. Listen again to the sentences. Sometimes snow is light, dry, and fluffy. light and dry. So boys and girls, if I pick up that light, dry, fluffy snow and I throw it up in the air, what's going to happen? It would all come falling right back down. Is the light, dry, fluffy snow the kind that you can use to make a snowball? No. I need Jordan and Leela to turn their bodies facing this way. Thank you. All right. Here's the tricky question. A couple of weeks ago, we read the story, The Snowy Day. I want to know, at the end of the story, Peter made a snowball. Which kind of snow did Peter use? What?
Okay, so we are going to go back to that poll question I think that we saw a minute ago and select one of these choices as far as which teacher and student behaviors did you see in that video, and you may select one of them, and we'll see how people respond here. Okay, I think we can show the poll results. There we go. Good. So the vast majority of you observed students responding to the teacher and didn't see so much many student voices, didn't see so much students responding to each other, and somewhat teacher validation, student responses, and then authentic checks for understanding. I think we'd all agree that, you know, good teacher, worked hard in this lesson, all good intentions happening, and I would probably even go so far as to say pretty typical interaction that we often see in classrooms. And so as we engaged in this project and in this work, we really were excited to work with teachers who just wanted to get better at their crafts, wanted to kind of like make sure they are best meeting the needs of their students. And so I'm reading a lot of posts and questions, and so one of the things that I always enjoy saying is that even though we get really excited about this, and we do, it is not to say that this work is easy. And so many of you talking about the struggles that you're having, that your students are having, and none of these are quick and easy fixes, but I think sharing experiences of educators who are sharing the struggles, quite frankly, is one of the things that we enjoy providing to all of you as an opportunity. All right.
All right, so we're going to move on now to the second part of our webinar where we're going to get into the practical. We're going to talk about some specific strategies that teachers can use so that they actually do shift the left here. So in this portion, our two SAP colleagues, Carrie and Tori, are going to share their expertise. They unfortunately are not able to be with us on the webinar tonight, but in terms of introductions, they are both literacy experts on our ELA team. And as you can see from this photo, Carrie and Tori also worked together at a school in Brooklyn, New York before coming to Student Achievement Partners. And this work around who's doing the work was something that they worked together in their previous setting as well. So they were very excited to be able to share with you and have submitted a video recording of their portion. So we're going to play that for you now. And they're going to start by talking about this very common sort of structure around conversation that we see in classrooms quite a bit. So let me get the video started for you.
This is actually something that we see quite often, and you'll see if you start looking for this in the classroom from yourself or from others, that most classroom talk is actually IR. So classroom talk, there's a name for it, actually ends up being initiated by the teacher with a response from a student and then an evaluation by that teacher. And while there's a place for this in the classroom, it's really worth considering what percentage of the time are we asking kids to listen to one another and what's the impact. So our analogy here is you're setting up a ping pong game. And if you can think about what you're doing when you're observing a ping pong game, you might maybe make the head movement for a second. You are doing a lot of watching, but I can tell you that I have never gotten better at ping pong that way. So translating that to the classroom, really thinking about the impact. So Tori, when I go through kind of our next steps for this, our strategies and tools. Sure. So we're sort of taking you the process that the teacher that we just watched went through as well. So that was before this project started, and now come our strategy tools. So they're called the Who's Doing Work strategy tools. They're available on Achieve the Core and also as a handout that goes along with this webinar. These are really just intended to be strategies for teachers to use to sort of shift the list from teachers to students. They're easy to implement, and they're very, very concrete. So how they're structured, just to orient you to them, the colored bar on top is for the content area. So we have one strategy sheet for read aloud or shared reading, one for complex text that's mostly used for the upper grades, grades 3 through 8, when students are reading more independently. And then there's also a version for foundational reading or fluency, which could definitely be used in guided reading for small group setting. Underneath that, just to connect back to our IPG core action, you're going to see some core action 3 indicators that really align with the strategies that are listed. And underneath that is where the good stuff is. That's the sequence of possible teacher moves that you could implement in the classroom to sort of shift the list. We use these in a variety of ways with this project. Some teams chose 1 or 2 strategies to try it at a time. Some chose the first strategy. Those would be things that happened before or at the beginning of the lesson and sort of work their way down. But these can be used in a variety of ways to definitely help shift that list. And for tonight, we're going to dig into 4 of those strategies. So we're going to look a little bit more closely at the idea of limiting your teacher modeling. We're going to look at posing test-specific questions with opportunities for everyone to engage in the work before going that student response. We're going to look at the idea of facilitating student-led discussion, where you're intervening for pacing or for misconceptions that the students are reading. And then we're going to look at involving student voices in reading or in rereading the text. These are 4 key strategies. They're not the only ones. So that handout that Tori mentioned has more, but these are the ones we're going to dig into right now. The first strategy, teacher modeling, is often one that you can engage in really well if you are using core curriculum that might be a little bit more outdated. I think this example here is from a Basil reader. Or if you have been trained the way I was trained, which is that when you get to the most challenging part of your lesson, you should think aloud to the kids to show them your thinking. That is actually something that shows students a lot of what you're thinking, but doesn't give them an opportunity to think themselves. And we know that at the very least, there is usually an opportunity, and there's usually a student or two in your class that might be able to present that model rather than you. So here we have an example for a third grade story about Roberto Clemente with a Think Aloud, where the teacher is both explaining what a biography is, saying what the text is about, that it's about a baseball player named Roberto Clemente, and then looking at the picture of him as a boy that's on the page and saying that the story, that she can see that the story starts when he's the boy. And instead of that, we just thought, what if you just turn it into a question? What if you simply say, looking at that picture on page 169, who do you think the boy in that tree is and why do you think that? To hear if students can get to this idea of Roberto Clemente being a boy because it's a biography and a story of his life. You can do it as a turn and talk. You can actually suggest that students reread a portion of the text to themselves in order to answer that question. Or you can listen in for students during turn talks for students who might be able to share if there is a real challenge that's being presented in the area of instruction that needs to be unpacked, just to see if you can add voices that aren't yours. All right, our next strategy is all about asking all the kids in your room to engage in the work. And we're particularly thinking about this in a whole class setting where maybe previously you would have asked a question and then called on one student, sort of that ping pong. But instead, pushing yourself to think about a way that all the kids in the room can engage in the thinking before you actually accept a whole class or start a whole class discussion. So this could definitely vary on grade level or the content being presented, and it doesn't mean that every question you ask has to be presented this way, but thinking about how to up the students doing the work through using some of these strategies. The first one Terry just mentioned, and is definitely very common in many classrooms throughout the country, which is think, pair, share, or turn and talk. I think in doing this project, I started to think more about how to use think, pair, share, and turn and talk to get students thinking. And one was really to consider what kinds of questions I used turn and talks for and making sure they were meaty enough to really have two kids and two brains thinking about the content and merit that classroom time. Another strategy that you can use that uses a partner talk, but could be much quicker for a less meaty question would be something like a whisper to your partner or quickly turn to your partner, or in the younger grades, a cute one is an owl share where they turn their heads like an owl and tell a few people a quick answer. So you can really use this strategy in a variety of ways depending on the rigor of the question. Another strategy that is one of my personal favorites is everybody writes, which means that you ask a question and everyone in your classroom gets a chance to write. You'll see on this slide, these are some of my former first grade students using their whiteboards during a read aloud to either write or draw their responses. I think the real value to everybody writes is that while turn and talks are fantastic, you do have to walk around and listen in, and you're probably not going to get to everyone. And with everybody writes, you get a really good chance to walk around and see a ton of student thinking before you have that whole class opportunity to share out. And the last one is really just asking kids to vote. Quick and easy. You can do it with silent hand signals, hands up. It can be a range of sort of voting options from agree to disagree to deciding between two maybe possible answer choices. But voting is a quick thing to do to engage all brains in the room and then come back to and see if anyone's opinion has changed after you've had that whole class discussion. And just a quick kind of recognition of the built-in differentiation that's offered by this strategy. I think you can really see that visually between pictures 2 and 3. It's a chance for everyone to engage at their level in a rigorous question, but all students are actually doing a response, and that's a really exciting thing at all grade levels to be able to see. Next strategy is facilitating student-led discussion. So our first kind of the key to this is actually a real teacher challenge, which is challenging yourself to not be a parrot. So you're not parroting everything that students say. You're actually holding them accountable for listening listening to each other. And you may want to consider your own poker face here and thinking about what your instinct is to do when someone is responding when they're incorrect. And you're kind of shutting down that incorrect comment with your face. Instead, just what do you all think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Can you add on? Letting them respond to one another. And then another consideration for student-led discussion is using open-ended prompts before you jump in to clarify misconceptions. So helping students think about the misconception and what they can do to address it, whether they are stuck on a word, stuck on reading, or whether they're challenged in terms of discussing the question at hand, but just getting them to really think, what can they do to respond to this challenge? Great. Our next strategy is all about getting more student voices, but this time with reading and rereading. So while it is absolutely appropriate for teachers to be doing some reading in classrooms some of the time, we also know that we can ask students to do more of that reading as well, to get their eyes on the page and to have them have that experience. So one way to do that is to have kids do more independent reading. And this is we're recommending these strategies be used during a whole group reading lesson. For example, the teacher is reading aloud, and then she may ask the student to stop and read to themselves a section of the text, or to reread with a purpose. For example, rereading a paragraph and circling specific words or ideas. Getting students' eyes on text is really important and connects back to all that research that Carrie shared at the beginning of this session. And we continue that strategy with some other ideas around multiple student voices. And so especially if you're thinking about reading text that is maybe at a higher level than some of your students, these can be really effective and connect again back to the research. Students can choral read together. Choral reading is really valuable. It provides a real model of fluency at all grades and can be more challenging words on the page to the comprehension that we're going for in a way that all students can engage in. If it's especially challenging, really echo reading can be a great strategy for that, so that kids get a chance to hear it first and then repeat it, or partner and buddy reading, either in similar groupings or actually high-low partnerships, depending on what your goals are. Here, we're really thinking about getting students access to more complex text and letting them read along and hear that text read aloud in a way that they are actually also interacting. So you want to really think about how challenging the text is and how much support students need as you think about which one of these would be most appropriate.
All right, so we hope you enjoyed those great strategies from Carrie and Tori, and we would love to hear right now, some of you have been putting some comments in along the way in the questions tab, but we would love to hear which of these you're excited about trying first. So share your thoughts with us and we'll continue to share them out with the whole group. So at this point, I'm really excited to introduce our two core advocate guests who are going to talk about how they've used this information in their own settings and the impact that it's had on student learning. So our first guest tonight is Bev Davis.
Hi, everyone. I am Bev Davis, and as you can see on the slide, I'm a superintendent, and it still feels really weird for me to say that. I've only been the superintendent since July. I was a classroom teacher for lots of years, specializing in literacy. I've done some work with student achievement partners, and most recently, I was the director of instruction in my district, so I was in charge of professional development. That's kind of where I got involved with this, who's doing the work, the focus group. There's just only 6 schools in my district. All of them are grades K through 8, and they're really small. We have just 1 class for each grade. And the culture in our district has been that schools and even teachers get to choose how they want to teach, how they want to teach math, how they want to teach literacy. So in 4 of my schools, they really use the Reader's Workshop, guided reading kind of model. I have 1 school using the Journeys program, and then one school where in each classroom it's kind of whatever you want to do, and some people use balanced literacy and some people use a core program. But in all of the schools, it seemed like the teachers were working really, really hard. But the students were kind of disengaged, and they were being spoon-fed, like teachers had to work so hard to pull anything out of them. So we've had a focus in our district on student engagement and the idea of formative assessment and really checking in on understanding and trying to get the students to take more ownership of their learning. So enter the Who's Doing the Work project, and I decided to approach it in a little bit different way. We've had lots of great feedback from our teachers that they really like kind of short-term book study type courses where they can earn some graduate credit for the work they're doing and spend some time engaging in new learning and new understanding together, developing that common language, and then trying things out in their classroom. So I designed this class. You can see what the objectives were. It was, we called it Moodle in the Middle. Moodle is an online discussion forum that we've had good luck using. So the teachers come together for the first class, and then they spend the next. In this case, it was 5 classes, I believe, online, emailing me weekly assignments and participating in online discussion. And then they worked on a project that they presented at the last class that was a way to extend their own learning, kind of hold themselves accountable for keeping all of this work going. So one of the things I asked everybody to do was before the first class, they were to record themselves teaching a literacy lesson. And then during the class, they watched themselves, they went off in a corner, they viewed their recording, or if it was just audio, they listened to it, and I asked them to map the conversations that were going on so that they could see, was it all just the teacher to student and back again, or like the ping pong kind of thing, or was it more a volleyball where students were talking to each other and it was more of a conversation. So they were doing that, and then each week they read and discussed a chapter. I think we're on the wrong slide. And they were asked to try out one technique from the chapter, reflect on it online, and then they got to choose an assignment from a menu of what they wanted to do. And there were things to choose from, like write a newsletter for your colleagues about what the chapter was about this week, write a blog post that I could post on my professional development blog, tell me how you're extending this work with your professional learning community in your school. And there was always the option to record yourself. And so many teachers, I was surprised, found that so powerful to record themselves, kind of reflect on those recordings, think about their learning that way. And then in the last class, the Next Steps project were so varied. It was everything from people completely redesigning their literacy block to incorporate this new learning and these new understandings. There was a couple people who decided they wanted to do a book study with colleagues in their school around this because they felt like it was going to be a really great way to shift everybody's thinking. And again, when groups of people engage in this learning together, it can just be so powerful. Some people just committed to having regularly recording themselves, reflecting on their teaching in order to improve and strengthen their instruction. So the next few slides, and I'll kind of go through them one at a time. I'm not going to read them to you, but these are quotes from teachers during the class. So you can kind of see the big ideas are highlighted in green. I had one of them really think about that gradual release, those strategies, so that you're not always doing all the work. You're not working harder than your kids, that you're really helping them to become more independent. You know, that idea that they thought they were being helpful, they thought they were supporting their students, and then they realized that really they weren't doing them any favors by kind of dragging the learning out of them. So there was also that idea that, you know, teachers have been frustrated for a long time that they do all this teaching and then it comes time for a culminating project or even an assessment, and it feels like the kids have forgotten everything. And they realized that if they changed their teaching, and the kids were doing more of the work and they owned that, that learning would stick with the students longer. It was really hard stepping back, letting students struggle. Nobody likes to see that. That was super hard for people. But they really came to realize how important that was. I think these last two quotes are from teachers near the end of the class, and kind of, again, the reflection they came to, that they are seeing, like, all of that stuff that we want to see for student engagement and the things that people had been trying to work on the last couple of years in our district. All of a sudden, they were seeing the payoff of that. They were seeing that students were taking ownership. They were going from passive learners to more active learners. And, you know, instead of being frustrated and disengaged because the work was hard, they were almost, kids were enjoying the struggle. They were grappling with content and new understandings, and it was really making a difference, and it just felt like a more engaging place for everyone with lots of learning happening. So again, that's how I chose to implement it, kind of in my role, giving people support and professional development that might, again, just help them strengthen their own instruction.
All right. Thank you so much, Bev. We really appreciate you sharing your insight and your hard work on that project. And I know I've been watching in the questions box, lots of people interested in hearing more about that. So I do want to turn the stage over now to our second core advocate guest. And I just want to call out that Lindsay attended just a workshop and got this information and then tried something out. So we're really excited to have Lindsay on tonight. She was not part of the original project, but has done some work based on her original learning. So let me turn it over and let her tell you about what she's done.
Hi, I teach English actually at Walla Walla High School. So I'm coming from working with a totally different population. At my high school, I teach some pretty different classes. On one hand, I teach a Tier 2 freshman English class that is more than one-half English language learners. But I also teach an honors sophomore English class that is pre-AP track and has a really high ratio of gifted learners. They have these really dramatically different planning and content needs, but I figured out that what they both really have in common is this need to be cognitively engaged through speaking and through inquiry. I did go to this Who's Doing the Work session in Denver last spring, and while I was already doing a lot of turn and talk and some cold calling to get all the voices in the room, I felt like the moment was right to push deeper and to get students to really dig into the content and own it more. So when I started this school this year, I decided to focus on writing as that prime opportunity to get kids engaged in the work. And where that started was really with feedback circles. So both classes started with some pretty big writing projects. For my freshmen, it was personal history poetry. And for my sophomores, it was This I Believe essay from the perspective of one of the characters in the Poisonwood Bible, which was their summer reading. So after their first draft, I had students write a question or a statement soliciting the feedback that they really wanted about their own writing. I felt like it would give them greater ownership of their writing and control over the feedback. And from a management perspective, I thought it would provide a focus for the feedback circle so they would stay more on topic. So the way I had it work was that in each group, the writer would start by sharing what they wanted feedback on, and then they had the opportunity to read their work out loud. Once they were done, the rest of the group took turns giving kind, specific, and helpful feedback. I knew that that wouldn't happen on its own, so to guide that process and keep my own voice out of the circles, I provided frames for really high-quality feedback that would help kids dig deeply into the writing and be as helpful as possible for the student writers. Again, my classes are really different though. So in my freshman classes, that feedback was written on a Post-it note, shared verbally, and then passed along to the writer to act on. In my sophomore classes, I gave them a more in note catcher to collect that feedback on, and then they shared that feedback verbally, and the original writer could take notes for themselves. I felt like it shifted the list in quite a few ways for my students. In the course of each feedback circle, every student had their voice heard 4 to 6 times, depending on the size of the group, as a reader and then as a provider of feedback. The process would fall apart if every student wasn't participating, so each student's input was integral to the process. They really felt valued. I also found that to give really specific and targeted feedback, students had to think critically about what was in that writing and about the detail in that writing. And they also had to find a way to communicate that clearly to their classmates. I also found that students got about 5 times the feedback that they would have if I was the only feedback giver. And they got it that day. They were able to act on it immediately. And then finally, I found that reluctant writers or kids who were just stuck in the process, they got to hear a variety of examples of the form. And that really helped them get started or change direction if that's what needed to happen. And I kind of expected all of those things to happen. I wasn't sure how it would go, but those were my anticipated consequences. There were also some unanticipated consequences. As students worked in their feedback circles, I decided my role was to walk around the room and listen in and take notes on the process itself. I found out that students broke out of the script a few times just so they could call attention to phrases and passages that gave them goosebumps or were humorous or caught their attention for whatever reason. I also heard them spontaneously start justifying the choices they made in their writing, and a lot of times they used evidence from the text to support why they made the choices they did. I heard students questioning each other about how a word or a phrase really fit in, why they choose that one there. And I also heard students really collaborating to problem solve a groupmate sticky spot in the writing and offering suggestions and just hashing it out together in a really collegial way. And then once the feedback circles were over, I saw those consequences continue as they went back to their own writing and tried out new techniques and put that feedback to use. When I first planned this, I wasn't sure how it would go. I worried it would fall flat, or the kids would just roll their eyes, or it would be more of the same surface level editing-focused feedback. And it wasn't perfect. We still have work to do, but I feel like the feedback circles really elevated the level of discourse in the classroom, and it increased student engagement in the writing process way beyond what I had hoped for.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lindsay. I'm conscious of the time, and I know some of you that are on the webinar tonight aren't able to stay over a little bit, but we would like to open up the opportunity for you to ask some specific questions of our guests, and if you're able to stay on a little bit longer, please do so. If you're not, please know that we will send you the full webinar recording as well as the copy of the slide deck. We've seen several people ask for the handout that Lindsay just mentioned. We'll get all of that stuff sent out to you in the next couple of days. So if you're not able to stay on, you'll still be able to hear the questions and benefits. So I'm going to allow Sandra and Jenny, if you've seen any questions pop up that we'd like to field for Bev or Lindsay.
I have one, actually. I'm kind of anxious to get this out there because I think a lot of you are beating yourselves up out there about like how you're struggling with this and how hard it is. So for both Bev and Lindsay, I wonder if you can talk about the transition to this. So a lot of people said hey, my students are used to being spoon-fed everything. They don't want anything. How do I get there? How do I get to the point where they are doing the lifting? And if you could speak to that kind of messy transition phase of this work.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is sentence frames. Like, I wrote them for myself so that, like, I wouldn't start giving the answer, so that I would ask open-ended questions. I also write them for my kids. For my Tier 2 kids, I pack in some academic vocabulary we're working on so they practice using it. For my advanced kids, I put in some of the literary techniques we're working on so that they know that that's what they're looking for. And that helped with that transition and conveying expectations.
I think that's a great idea, and I think the other thing is that this is really, really hard. And I think that it's hard, most especially for kids who are used to not struggling. So when you kind of up the ante a little bit, and they aren't, you know, the kids who have always struggled, they're kind of used to it, and they're oftentimes, when you set them up to in a way that they can engage with the work, they feel supported. I think the teachers that I worked with found that it's kind of the high flyers that really struggle, and you know, for that I say, you know, like, you just have to kind of hang in there. The teachers did, they hung in there. They were able to, because they had this cohort that they were kind of doing this work with, they were able to get feedback from each other. They were able to talk honestly with each other and, you know, share their struggles, share their frustrations, and I think that's super important. So I know it's hard. Just hang in.
And I know someone just posted that sentence frame super helpful for English learners as well. I think that's great add-on.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for some great conversation tonight. I know we could probably sit on for another hour with these discussions, and we're really appreciative of our two guests and of all of you for engaging with us and even going over time a little bit. So we'd like to encourage you to set a goal for taking action around what you learned on tonight's webinar, and remembering this definition of instructional advocacy that we mentioned at the beginning. We would love to hear what you do as a result of this webinar, and maybe even feature your story and your work on an upcoming webinar or in our newsletter or something like that. So we'll be following up with you in about a month, and we would love to hear what you've done as a result of your learning tonight. We also would love to see you again next month. We have Core Advocate webinars on the first Wednesday night of every month from 7 to 8 Eastern. And next month, we'll be talking about the Book Baskets project and how you can optimize your classroom library. So once again, on behalf of my colleagues from Student Achievement Partners, thank you to Lindsay and Bev, and thank you to all of you. We hope that you have a great night. Bye-bye.